Welcome to the Security Plus study session. Today we're going to go over ransomware. Ransomware, as we know, is a type of malware designed to encrypt files. Once accessing a user's computer or a network, attackers will attempt to encrypt all of the files on the network to make them unusable, and then demand high payments in return to decrypt the data. This obviously causes a loss of availability for the targets, for the victims of the attack, and ransomware can be protected against with the use of proper backups. Firms sometimes even pay the ransom, pay the attacker to get their data back because of the great impact or the great loss that can occur to the organization due to that loss of availability. It's also given a choice whether to pay the ransom or to try and recover the data on its own. Ransomware, the ransom itself might just be a few $1,000s, ranging anywhere up to 6 figures, from a couple $1,000s to maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the size of the organization and what the attackers think they can get away with. Attackers need to strike a balance between applying a ransom that's not too little, so they don't get any payout, but not too great that the organization would just simply refuse to pay. So with ransomware, what do attackers target? Well, attackers generally target both private sector and public sector. They'll target government agencies. They'll also target private sectors as well, and they'll target files and folders and areas of the victim's hard drive, area of the victim's data that the attacker thinks that the victim cannot do without. Okay, so let's take a look at an industry-leading report created by Sophos, a well-known cybersecurity firm, and see what they have to say about the state of ransomware, at least within 2020. All right, so this is the Sophos report, State of Ransomware in 2020. And this report goes into detail about the types of ransomware that's being used on the market now, what attackers are trying to accomplish with ransomware, and current trends in the industry. So if we go down to the executive summary, you can see the polling data. Sophos has polled organizations across the globe. Many different countries have responded to their survey that they sent out, and they got 26 different countries responding. The majority of these firms were IT, technology, and telecoms, but you have many different industries represented here. Everything from media, energy, financial services, and the public sector. So we have a couple trends I'd like to highlight. It seems to be a well-known fact that the public sector is more targeted by ransomware than the private sector, but according to this report, that's not entirely true. This report concludes that the private sector was more likely to be targeted with ransomware than the public sector. And it showed similar percentages for how often the private sector was targeted versus the public sector, 45 to 51%. It also states that paying the ransom doubles the cost for an organization of the ransomware attack. So performing backups, as we know, backups are the way to combat ransomware. If an attacker has encrypted your files, the way you combat that is you find files that you have backed up. So instead of paying a ransom to decrypt your files, just take your latest backup and apply it to your network, fix any security vulnerabilities where attackers may have entered your network, and you're fine. Obviously, that costs a great deal of time, energy, and resources. You're going to have to pay personnel costs to perform the backups. You're going to lose some information because backups, unless you have very robust backups, you're not going to have real-time backup systems. You're going to lose some time. Hopefully that's just a few hours, could be a few days of productivity. You're going to cause just a disruption in your business processes because people are losing the data that they've been working on. But according to this report, and it makes sense to me, the cost of paying the ransom is much greater because you not only have to pay the physical price of the ransom, which probably is much less than the cost associated with getting the data back and fixing the network. If you choose to pay the ransom, you're at the mercy of the attacker to see, first off, if they decrypt the data, and then what the time frame for decryption is. According to this report, only 26% of the respondents who were affected by ransomware paid a ransom to get their data back. And 1% of those paid a ransom but did not get a data back. So that means, generally, that most attackers will decrypt the data if they're properly paid the ransom. But, again, you're placing yourself at the mercy of these attackers. One of the main features of this report says that almost 3/4 of ransomware attacks resulted in the data being encrypted. 51% of organizations were hit by ransomware in the last year, and criminals succeeded in encrypting data in 73% of these attacks. So that means that most ransomware attacks, if an organization is subject to them, 73%, nearly 3/4 of the attackers succeed in encrypting data, that's a very good percentage of success, I think. So that means attackers are highly successful once they find a means to enter a network, of finding the devices to encrypt and then applying encryption. It's fairly alarming. And then for those organizations that paid a ransom, oftentimes they use cybersecurity insurance to pay the ransom. And 94% of the customers or the individuals who paid a ransom paid the ransom with cybersecurity insurance. So that's a means of transferring risk, as we know. These organizations have assessed the risk of ransomware. They purchase insurance ahead of time, and they use that insurance to pay the ransom itself. So in that way, they've transferred the risk to the insurance company, and hopefully they've gotten their money's worth, at least with this ransom. But some of these organizations have holes in their cybersecurity insurance in the first place. Only 64% of the respondents who have cybersecurity insurance have cybersecurity insurance that covers ransomware. So organizations need to be very careful and pay attention to the terms of the insurance to ensure that ransomware is covered, because ransomware is one of the more common attacks we're seeing nowadays. And you can see with the high success rate, 73% of ransomware attacks encrypt the data, why ransomware is so popular. And then here we have, at least for our cloud security students, the most successful ransomware attacks included data in a public cloud. So 59% of attacks where data was encrypted involved data in a public cloud. And I mean, in this sense, the public cloud can mean many different types of things. And I would reckon that a lot of these respondents that claimed that their information was in a public cloud really were operating a hybrid cloud where they had a cloud service as an extension to their private network. But it's still interesting to note that 59% involved cloud data. So let's take a look at how prevalent ransomware is. And basically, it follows the same trends we've been seeing throughout the last few years. About half of organizations who respond to this survey and about half of organizations in general have been hit by a ransomware attack of some form within the last year. So it notes here in the report that there's a slight drop, 3%, but honestly, I think that is probably within the margin of error for this report. So saying about half, I don't really see a significant trend or a decrease here. About half of organizations are going to experience a ransomware attack. So assessing the risk of ransomware is incredibly important for an organization, and determining means of addressing that risk, like cybersecurity insurance as a method of transferring risk, or possibly providing more perimeter security on your network, is very important. And then the percentage of organizations hit by ransomware. This takes a look at different countries throughout the globe, and it ranks them based on the percentage that were hit by ransomware in the last year. So the majority attacks occurred for firms in India, and these get ranked down: India, Brazil, Turkey, Belgium, Sweden, the United States, all the way down to South Africa. This is where organizations or attackers see the most opportunity or potential to have a successful ransomware attack succeed. And it makes a note about India being the top country, saying that the state of cybersecurity, or the level of robustness with cybersecurity, is sometimes lacking in many of these Indian firms, which would explain why there's a prevalence of attacks there. But, I mean, this is a guess ventured by the analysts of this report. And by reading this report, I looked ahead of this. In this report, I don't really see any significant evidence that the analysts have provided to explain their reasoning behind these numbers. But anyway, then we have the different sectors of the different industries that are affected by ransomware attacks. And this seems pretty split evenly across the board. And honestly, I think attackers would target basically any industry they can get a hold of, any type of firm they can get a hold of, because ransomware attacks don't discriminate. They can be easily as effective against any one person or any organization. So we have heard in the past years of private sectors, particularly hospitals, being targets of ransomware attacks, and that still holds true, but you can't discount the private sector as well. Private firms are just as likely to be hit. And oftentimes, private firms don't feel a pressure to report a breach or a ransomware. As some government firms would have regulatory pressure or pressure to report that event to proper government channels. So those events might go, they will be reported perhaps at a higher percentage than those of the private sector, where the private sector has a motivation to keep their reputation intact, so they'd be less likely to report these events. Something to keep in mind. And then we have the impact of ransomware. We have, as we said before, nearly 3/4 or 73% of the time, cyber criminals succeeded in encrypting data, which is a very high success rate indeed. Only 1/4 of the attacks were stopped before the data was encrypted, and then 3% occurred where the data was not encrypted, but the attacker still tried to perform a ransom. Okay. And then we have a percentage of attacks stopped before the data was encrypted, which I'm not entirely sure how useful that information is, honestly. And here we go with data in the public cloud is a mainstream target, which I think is a pretty interesting point. So here we have 59% includes data in a public cloud, and this has been broken down into two different factors. 35% of the data would be in the public cloud, just data in the public cloud, and 24% would be in a hybrid cloud, or it says data in the public cloud and on-premises or private cloud data, which would be a hybrid cloud. A hybrid cloud is any combination of a public or private cloud, or any combination of of two cloud models, community, public, and private. So we have 24% being in a hybrid cloud and 35% of data in the public cloud. And here we have 41%. The rest of the data being targeted would be data that would be a private cloud or controlled by the organization. It makes a note that says recipients or respondents took a broad interpretation of the word public cloud to include Google Drive, Dropbox as cloud backups, which honestly, I think that's fine. Google Drive is a public cloud, Dropbox is a public cloud, as is AWS and Azure. So I'm not sure why that note needs to be made, really. And then we have a percentage of organizations that pay the ransom by country, which, again, I don't find particularly useful. 94% of organizations got their data back if they, when they were affected by ransomware. Now, how they got their data back, 56% used backups to get their data, which is the best way to protect against a ransomware attack. Good, solid backups on a solid schedule will protect you against a ransomware attack, because the attackers may get access to one network with all of your data, but you should have your backups stored in a separate location with separate security protection mechanisms. And if you do it right, attackers are unlikely to find your backups as well as your production data. So that is the best response method and probably the cheapest for organizations to do. And the more recent organizations perform backups, then the faster they can get back on track. So 26% retrieved their data back by paying a ransom, but more than double, 56% restored their data using these backups. And then 12% said they got their data back through other means, and I'm not sure what that would be. Perhaps breaking the encryption, though I don't think so. Then the average cost, at least in US dollars this is measured, the global average was $761,000 per attack. For smaller organizations, that cost dropped slightly to $500,000, and for larger organizations, that grew to about $1 million. So again, ransomware attacks can be incredibly costly. Now, this is an interesting graphic. This shows the cost of remediation, the cost of reversing a ransomware attack by country. And we see Sweden and Japan vastly outpacing all of the other countries on this grid with the cost of remediating ransomware. And it states that the possible reason for the variation in cost is a differentiation in labor costs with different countries. So there might be higher salaries in Sweden and Japan, which would account for this extra cost, though I think that would have part to do with it. Again, the analysts don't provide sufficient data, in my opinion, to back up their claims. This, though, I think is a good statistic. Paying the ransom doubles the cost. You pay the ransom, average cost of the remediation was $1,450,000, while if you didn't pay the ransom, it was $720,000 or $730,000. So again, the cheapest way is to perform those backups. Now, some organizations that don't perform proper backups won't have that option available to them, and they will be at the mercy of the attackers. They might choose to pay the ransom. We've talked about insurance, I think, pretty well. Let's see. This talks about how private sector versus public sector is affected. And again, a little bit more on insurance. Now here we go back. Now we get into the ransomware techniques. And the majority of the incidences, 29%, occurred via a download link or an email with a malicious link. This would be a type of phishing attack where an attacker would send a file, maybe a Word document, that would include a download link or a malicious script in the document. Could be a PDF, could be an Excel file, Word, PowerPoint. And if the user would open that document and click on the link, their machine would be affected. The attackers would have a backdoor into that network. That's a very common attack method. It preys, not everybody in an organization is a cybersecurity expert. So especially if an attacker has some knowledge of who works in a company, they can spoof or claim to be the identity of somebody else, somebody within the company, send an email with a malicious link, have a user click on it, and all of a sudden they have a backdoor into the network. Next, most common attack is a remote attack on a server at 21%. And then we have email with a malicious attachment, which is similar. That would be a piece of software embedded or as an attachment to an email. So similar to the first method, and I think these two, you could almost lump them together. So the vast majority of instances, I'd say 45%, occur with some sort of email or phishing type of attack, where a user is tricked into clicking a link within the email itself or by opening an attachment that has malicious scripts. And then we have misconfiguration, remote desktop protocol, which is a commonly exploited protocol. And then here's some phishing attacks via a supplier. That's poor supply chain management, USB or removable media. It's a common type of attack where an attacker can just drop a USB drive that has some malicious files in a high traffic area, maybe next to an office building. Somebody picks it up and they wonder what's on it. They go and they plug in their computer. The USB file executes a program that gives the attacker a backdoor. So very few organizations did not know what happened or how they were affected. Most understood when they performed some analysis on their network how attackers got in, and the vast majority of those would be these malicious links. So that pretty much concludes the report. Sophos is an excellent cybersecurity company, focuses on cloud security and other cybersecurity aspects, but I think this is a really good, looking at these reports gives you an understanding of the current trends in the industry, and I hope that going through this report with you, we were able to see some trends together and you gained a little bit better understanding of ransomware and how it can affect an organization. So if you have any questions, please reach out, info@cybercrafttraining.com. Be happy to answer any questions. And please check out the link in the description to look at our Security Plus course. If you want to help prevent attacks like this, you want to earn an average yearly salary of $85,000 per year, start a career in cybersecurity, our Security Plus course will teach you everything you need to know to pass the exam in 1 week so you can start applying for jobs, get those positions. Cybersecurity is hiring like never before. More companies are working remotely. They have remote workforces, and more information is going to the cloud. So firms need to secure their data. They need to protect against ransomware attacks like this, and they need cybersecurity professionals to do so. Now's the time to join the field. Check out our course. We teach you everything you need to know to pass that exam in 1 week. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.